Good morning and welcome back to Dr. Logic continues to awkwardly talk about predicate logic. I'd like to do a little bit of summing up of where we are now because in the last couple of weeks we've had a whole bunch of new material, new definitions, new complexity that we've been talking about. In principle, what we've been doing isn't any different from what we did with the syllogistic or with propositional logic. I gave you a language. I gave you some kind of informal ways of thinking about how to read this language, what it represents, the kinds of meanings that we're trying to capture with it. And then we talked about semantics, so the formal way of assigning meaning, which in the case of all three of these logics is in the sense of truth. So meaning is defined as truth, to the various sentences that we can express in these languages. And then we talked about good argumentation, whether something follows from something else in a logically valid fashion, i.e. if every truth value assignment or every interpretation or every model, each one of these is slightly different for each of the systems we've looked at, but the same general concept is the same. So anytime that one of these things makes the premises of an argument true, they also make the conclusion of the argument true, or a way that you can demonstrate invalidity is by giving an interpretation that makes the conclusion false, but makes all of the premises true. Or in the case of predicate logic, you could have a model that makes all of your premises true, but you could still find a false example of the conclusion. And then we talked about ways in which the semantic side of things might actually be more useful if we have a sort of kind of semi-automated way of generating these valid arguments, these things where the arguments that reach the best status of goodness that we could possibly want, this necessary connection between the truth of the premises and the truth of the conclusion. So that was what we would use then to justify developing proof theory. And the proof theories that we have identified have a number of different desiderata. We've talked about it for the previous two systems, and so I'm only going to touch on these two desiderata for predicate logic. They are that, first of all, we want everything that we prove to in fact correspond to a valid argument, and that's the notion of soundness. So we proved that our syllogistic system was sound, we proved that propositional logic is sound. We could do exactly the same thing with very similar techniques for predicate logic and our predicate proof rules, simply by shifting our interpretations from truth value assignments to predicate logic models, and then showing that each one of the rules that we've introduced is truth preserving. Now, because our truth conditions for the propositional side of things hasn't changed, all we would need to do is show that the truth conditions for the quantifiers correspond with the rules that we have introduced. I'm not going to do that at this point in the videos. This is something that we'll probably kind of circle back to some time from now because I've got plenty of other things I want to talk about. But I do just want to flag up that yes, this system of proof that I've given you is sound. Anything that you can derive in our predicate logic proof theory will correspond to a valid predicate logic argument. More complicatedly, and so also being put off for a future discussion, is the other direction. So everything that we can prove is valid. This is kind of like the base minimum level for a good proof theory. If you're able to prove things that are not truth preserving, you've got a bad proof theory and you want to revise. So soundness is kind of like a given. It's a base level. If you don't have that, you just don't have a good proof theory. The other direction is that you can prove every valid argument. And that's the notion of completeness. Now, predicate logic, according to semantics like the ones that I've given and the sort of proof theory that we've been discussing, is complete. So it would be possible to show that every single valid argument you can prove given the rules that I've defined for you. Again, this is going to be left for future work, which is another phrase that logicians love. For two reasons. One, it's a fairly complicated and technical sort of proof to do, and would need some more machinery and some more definitions and some more background stuff and more kind of methodology that we haven't talked about yet. So I'm going to put that off for a bit because there are still other things about logic that we want to talk about. In fact, we would like to talk about systems of logic where maybe our definition of goodness of argument isn't this hugely robust, very high, gold standard, necessary truth preservation, possibly even with true premises, because, face it, that sort of argument is going to be very difficult to come across in the wild. You are not going to find many people, even philosophers, who are sitting down and writing out syllogisms, who are writing out kind of arguments that can be reconstructed according to conjunction elimination and disjunction introduction and universal elimination and things like that. This just isn't how people argue out in natural language. Also, there are cases in which there are reasons to think that this sort of standard of goodness is too strong because, in a sense, you can never get anything out of your premises that wasn't already in there. So you can never, part of the reason why you can make these into automated systems and you can have theorem provers and you can plug it all into a computer is that everything that you need to know in order to be able to determine what the valid consequences of some set of premises are, it's all in the premises. You aren't going to get anything new. If I tell you that every cat is an animal and that Goldie is a cat, then the fact that Goldie is an animal is already encoded in our premises. Now, you may not have known that, you may not have drawn that inference, but the information was there. And so this is actually something that people have kind of, it's sort of a pragmatic argument against this approach to good argumentation. On the one hand, the standard is too strong, we're never going to get it. On the other hand, when we do get it, we don't actually get anything interesting. We don't get any new information. So part of the reason why I'm leaving some of these more technical notions for predicate logic aside for the time being, we will come back to them, just not in the immediate future, is because I think that there are more interesting notions of logic that we could be talking about instead. So join me next time, because that's what we're going to be talking about. Take care, and see you then. Cheers.